If the exchange rate between our currency and the foreign currencies fluctuate too much and our Kenya shillings lose value, you and me are in trouble. When you know someone who is not credible, you have had some experience with them in the past, for instance. But then you hear that this person who is not credible, according to you, has actually written a book that people are praising. You will have your instincts, and your instincts will tell you that that book is indeed not worth reading. But until you actually get to read that book, you will not have the absolute authority to either confirm that that book is not credible or otherwise. Let's talk power. In this channel, we are on a journey to ensure that you get the power to understand how systems really work. When we began this quest, we wanted to find out what really has been causing us the high cost of power. Why are you paying more? Now, after the previous episode, where we basically highlighted the role of system losses and the capacity charges in PPAs and how all that contributes to our high cost of power, someone asked me why I am against capacity charge. No, I am not against capacity charge. I am pro-optimization, okay? It does not make sense economic-wise to put up a 100 megawatt plant only to use 7 or 3 during operations, okay? In fact, it shows inefficiency. And remember, the bigger the size of the power plant, if we put a 100 megawatt power plant, the private investor has to raise so much money to build it, as opposed to if the same private investor was asked to do a 20 megawatt power plant, okay? And remember, the more investment, the more the price, basically the tariff has to be adjusted so that me and you can meet the cost of that investment. But if we have an optimized level, then we basically put up a power plant whose capacity matches our needs. For example, if you look on your screen, this is the load curve, a typical load curve in Kenya. Okay? We usually have 2 periods where there's a serious increase in power usage. About 5 a.m. in the morning up to 9, and again from around 5 p.m. up to 10. Now, if, for example, in the morning, we know that that period of increased usage, we only need an additional of about 200 megawatts. And in the evening, again, we need an additional of around 300 megawatts. Then the thermal power plants, which are majorly used for meeting this kind of sudden increase in power demand, we can size them optimally. We can decide to do a 300 megawatts plus maybe 20% capacity. Or we can do a 300 megawatts, but with an option that in the next 5 or 10 or 20 years, we'll keep on scaling it up, okay? Other than putting up 1,000 megawatt power plant now, and then at the operations phase, only 20 or 100 megawatts is being drawn. But remember, we have to pay because the private player has to recoup their investment. The loans that were taken have to be paid. The private player must also get some good returns for the effort that they placed in setting for us the power plant. Now, when optimization is overlooked, the big power plant that is rarely called in to produce power brings in something called deemed generation or deemed generated energy. What it means is the private partner or the private owner of the power plant is saying, look, I have a 100 megawatt power plant. Between 7 a.m. yesterday, for example, up to 7 a.m. today, it is available for you to take. But you only chose to take 20 megawatts, okay, in the 24-hour cycle. So I'm going to bill you for the other 80 megawatts that was available, but you chose not to take. That is the so-called deemed generated energy. And it has brought a lot of politics. People are wondering, why are we paying you for something that you didn't generate? But remember, it's at the point of project development where the private player was told to do a certain capacity. And doing a certain capacity meant he had to invest or put in or assemble or acquire certain loans and equity of a certain measure to be able to put up that power plant. Now, Philip Musembi, who is the managing director of Afrigen Energy, had something interesting to say about this availability charges and dim generation. He said, and I read, availability charges and dimmed generation are essential for making projects bankable. You need that project. If the private player takes it to the banks need to look at it and be able to see that they are able to get their returns at the operations phase. Otherwise, there's nobody who's going to give you their loans to be able to put up the power plant. But he goes on and says, let me read it again, availability charges and dim generation are essential for making power plants bankable, but they must be carefully designed to avoid unnecessary costs for consumers. This is basically what I'm saying, optimization. In fact, it goes on and says that countries such as India, South Africa, and the UK have shown that balanced power purchase agreements, robust grid planning, and strong regulation can protect both the investors and electricity users. So let's strike that sweet spot. The private partner be asked to put up a power plant that we will really meet our requirements, okay? That way, when we are repaying, we don't have to feel the pain of having to pay for something that is idle most of the time. Now, in this episode, we are going to learn 4 other key factors or causes that have been contributing to the high cost of power in this country. Remember, this report or this presentation is based on the report that was done by the National Energy Committee, and the report was presented to Parliament in November 2025. Now, the first factor that contributes to the high cost of power in your bill and my bill is something to do with the currency that is being used in our power purchase agreements. Most of those power purchase agreements, if not all, are inked or signed in foreign currencies, dollars, euros, etc. Okay? Remember, Kenya Power bills you and me in Kenya shillings. So Kenya Power has to collect the revenue from you and me and others in Kenya shillings, but the independent power producers are expecting dollars or euros from Kenya Power. Now, you recall that Kenya shillings is not always very stable against the dollars. 1 minute, for example, Kenya shillings could be trading 100 shillings against the dollar. There's even a time it got to 166. So when such things happen, then it put pressure on Kenya Power. Okay, I want to demonstrate by picking this table from the report, which basically shows the amount of energy that was purchased by Kenya Power from both KenGen and independent power producers. And I will use the independent power producers as an example. So let's focus on the year 2021-2022. You can see the total energy that was purchased was 12,653 gigawatt hour, okay? At a cost of 95 billion Kenya shillings. Now, if you look at the amount of energy that was sold by independent power producers, it was 4742 gigawatt hour, okay? And Kenya Power remitted 56 billion Kenya shillings to the independent power producers. Now, we now know that in that year, 2021-2022, Kenya Power was supposed to pay independent power producers 56 billion Kenya shillings. Okay? Now, in the year that Kenya was supposed to pay 56 billion Kenya shillings, if the exchange rate of Kenya shillings and dollar was 109 shillings, then we just divide by the 56 billion Kenya shillings, and then we find that that year Kenya Power was supposed to remit 516 million USD to the independent power producers. Let's assume in the same year, instead of having the exchange rate at 109, it actually happened at 135. $1 going for 135 Kenya shillings. Remember, Kenya Power is still collecting revenue from you and me and others at Kenya shillings. So in their hands, they will still have 56 billion Kenya shillings. But now the exchange rate is 135. If you divide, then you'll find that instead of having 516 million USD, now Kenya Power will have 416 million USD. It means Kenya Power has a deficit of 99 million USD in their hands. This money needs to be paid to the independent power producers. You can already guess that somebody has to be pinched to pay this money. Okay? That deficit, which has an equivalent of about 13.4 billion Kenya shillings, has to be paid for. Now, let's go to, was it late 2023 or early 2024 when the exchange rate got to 166, $1 for 166. If that was the rate in the year 2021, 2022, then you can see the 56 billion that Kenya Power had. If you divide by 166, then Kenya Power was only going to have about 339 million USD to give to the independent power producers, which is a deficit of 177 million USD, or about 29.4 billion. That money, somehow you and me were going to pay for it. On the other end, if it happens that our currency becomes stronger, sometimes it gains. For example, let's assume now the exchange rate was $1 for 90 shillings, then you'll find that for the same 56 billion Kenya shillings, Kenya Power will actually have 625 million USD in their hands. That's a surplus of 108. That would mean on this year, for example, our tariffs would go lower because now Kenya Power has excess money, in quotes, to pay to the independent power producers. So this is the effect of having the PPAs in foreign currencies. If the exchange rate between our currency and the foreign currencies fluctuate too much, and our Kenya shillings lose value, you and me are in trouble. Now you have it. Let me know what you think can be done about this issue. Now, the second cause of our high cost of power has something to do with how our tariffs are structured. There's the amount of money that goes to buy the actual tokens or units, okay? I call it the cost before levies, before tax, or before adding any charges. In a very ideal world where we are not expected to pay taxes or levies or any other charges, you'd pay that and all of us would be fine. Let's listen to what Dr. Siror, the MD of Kenya Power, has to say.
So if you look at them right now, what you pay in your tariff, 63 to 65% goes to generation. So for every 100 shillings you pay, 63% has gone to compensate for those who are generating.
Let's also listen to what Dr. Mutua of EPRA had to say about the various components in your tariff.
When you look at your bill, then it has the energy charge rate, it has the fuel, it has the forex adjustment, it has inflation, it has the water resource authority, and then now it has the VAT.
Yes.
The VAT, the value added tax, you pay it on consumption, and also there is also the 5% the rural electrification levy. That is a levy that is charged to extend the network in the rural areas. So those are the components. So you find now the bill, if you are using 0 to 30, your bill is coming to about maybe 20 shillings right now. When you but the price is about maybe 12, let's say like 12 shillings, the non-fuel.
Yes.
If you add some fuel and you add taxes, it comes to about 20 shillings for the lifeline.
Now, if you paid attention, you notice that Dr. Mutua of EPRA forgot to mention that there's also EPRA levy that goes for about 0.08 Kenya shillings per unit. That is part of also the pass-through levies and taxes that are in your tariff. So in a nutshell, aside from the cost that Dr. Siror calls the cost that goes to the generators or to meet the generation, there are 7 other pass-through charges or levies or taxes. Okay? Now, I did a very detailed analysis on the various components of our tariff. On your screen is a video that you can go and watch so that you understand how each and every component of your tariff are put together until you end up with the bill, or you end up with the breakdown of the amount of money you are spending to buy units. Now, the first pass-through charge is called fuel energy cost. There are some power plants, especially the thermal power plants, that burn, for example, diesel to produce power. When that diesel is burned, there's a cost element that comes with it, okay? So, for example, we are in the month of July. The diesel that was burnt in June is being paid for in July. And this also affects, I remember there are areas in Kenya which are not connected to the national grid. For example, a place like Mandera, there are diesel power plants up there. When the diesel is being burned, that fuel component has to be met by you and me and other users in the tariff. So that is the first component. The second one is the foreign exchange and rate fluctuation adjustment. As I had stated earlier, because our currency is never stable against the big currencies like dollars, euros, and remember, the independent power producers are expecting their money in foreign currencies, some adjustments have to be made to basically reflect the reality of how our currency is doing against the other currencies. Now, the third component or the third pass-through charge in your tariff is inflation adjustment, okay? Now, with time, the purchasing power changes. 1,000 shillings could have gotten you a box of milk in January. It is not guaranteed that the same 1,000 can give you one box. Perhaps it can give you half or more. That inflation changes also affect the electricity production, and an adjustment has to be made. That adjustment is also passed through in your tariff and in my tariff. The fourth one is the water levy. There are some power plants which use water to generate power. Now, if the power plant is 1 megawatt or more, then there is a small levy that is being charged for the use of that power, and that levy is the water levy, or the one that in your bill is written Warma levy. Okay? Now, the fifth levy that is being paid for is the rural electrification program. As Dr. Mutuad indicated, this money is used to ensure electricity reaches places that have not yet been reached in this country with electricity power. So again, there's a small portion of it in your bill that goes to meet that program. The sixth one is the EPRA levy that goes at 0.08 shillings per unit. And then the last one is the VAT that is applied at 16%. Now, if you remember what Dr. Sirot said, he said that before you apply the pass-through charges, levies, and taxes, then about 65% goes to generation, or 65% is the true cost of buying power. That means about 35% goes to the pass-through charges, goes to the levies, and goes to the taxes. Okay? I have done some small analysis just to show, to verify what Dr. Siror is saying. You can see for the month of June, I have used 3 customers. One is a domestic consumer 1, the other one is DC2, the other one is DC3. Now, those are customers whose consumption per month varies. But the bottom line is, if each one of them spend 1,000 shillings to buy units, sorry, you can see the token amounts vary as displayed, and the percentage that is used and the percentage that is used to actually buy power before applying taxes varies from around 57.9% to 67.8%, which is more or less in agreement with what Dr. Siror was saying. You can also see the number of units vary depending on the various tariffs. And finally, the pass-through charges, you can also see it's between 42 and 32%. So it basically means if you have a way of trying to moderate and reduce some of these components, then perhaps instead of, for example, only committing about 65% to buying your units, okay, you may end up committing about even 80%. Remember, part of the money that is in the 65% is the availability charges, okay, that goes to those thermal power plants. So you already see that there are so many places that if well pressed, we can end up with the cost of power significantly reduced in this country. Okay? Now, the third factor that is contributing to your high cost of power is the regime, the pricing regime in the PPA. Okay? There's something called availability charge, which I'd already explained, and the output charge. Basically, availability charge is saying, I am putting up this 100 megawatt power plant. You better take it. If you don't take it, you are going to pay for it. So, if this is not properly done at the concept stage, at the project development stage, there's no room for correction once the PPA is signed. And so we have to live with it. Okay? The second one is the output charge, where what actually flows from the power plant will be paid for. Again, this one also calls for optimization. We can always tell how much power will be needed this year, next year, 5 years, 20 years to come, so that we put up power plants where the availability charge, again, and the output charge are as close to reality as possible. That way, we don't have to pay for things we don't need. Now, finally, the last one also has something to do with the tariff escalation clauses in the PPAs. Okay, I'll read word for word. It says from the report, many PPAs include escalation clauses which allow the tariff to increase annually by a predetermined percentage or be adjusted based on an inflation index. This is done to account for inflation and changes in the cost of living. What is the solution here? Let us carefully read and understand all the terms being put in the PPAs. Because again, PPAs are long-term in nature. They are not easy to change once it is signed. We almost have to live with it. And some of those clauses that have been put in some of these PPAs, we are living with them to date. From the late 90s, when the first PPAs were signed, and the subsequent ones. Now at this point, you perhaps think that we have covered everything. Well, if our quest involved covering a sphere, we have only done about 80%. There's another 20% that we also need to touch. Once we have everything covered, then we go to the next phase of, now we know the problems. What then are the solutions? Before the next episode, let me know, what do you think can be done about PPAs being signed in foreign currencies? Both the ones that could be signed in the future and the ones that have already been signed. Let me know also what you think about the composition of our electricity tariffs. Until next time, my friend, be safe.